Hi everybody, Shalom Lekulam, and welcome back to the channel. It's been a long slog, but I finally did it. I finished all 84 units of Duolingo Hebrew. This video is for anybody who uses Duolingo, anybody learning Hebrew, and definitely the intersection of the two. I'll address what was good, what was bad, what I learned, what I didn't learn, the answer might surprise you, and what I did to make it better for anybody else who might be thinking about learning Hebrew and who is struggling to make Duolingo work. The obvious question is, does it work? And the answer that I'll explain later is sort of. It can be an incredible resource, but not out of the box. I struggled to make it work for me for years, and that's with a PhD in linguistics, so it's not necessarily intuitive, the language or how to make Duolingo work. But here, judge for yourself. Shalom לכולם, ברוכים הבאים לסרטון החדש שלי. סיימתי את כל הקורס דואלינגו של עברית, ועכשיו כנראה יש לכם את השאלה, זה היה יעיל? באמת, אני לא יודע. אני מדבר עברית שוטף? לא. לא, אבל עשיתי הרבה התקדמות. That reminds me, if you're new to the channel, I'm Dr. Taylor Jones. I've got a PhD in linguistics from the University of Pennsylvania. And on the channel, I discuss everything related to language, linguistics, language learning, and culture. If you're into those topics, be sure to subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. This is Language Jones. What is Duolingo? If you've been living under a rock, Duolingo is a hugely popular language learning app. It's always been a little nefarious, but it's also always been mostly sort of free. It started as a way of crowdsourcing corrections for machine translation. No, really, look it up. That's why I wasn't shocked when they said they were AI first earlier this year. They were always harvesting corrections for translation engines and later large language models. LLMs are what most people think of now when they say AI. Anyway, they have free and paid versions, a ton of languages, and they are an app that is heavily gamified. They have lessons that are radically different depending on the language, in part because until a few years ago, the courses were made by teams of volunteers, so they really vary in character from language to language. For some languages, they have almost 300 lessons. For Hebrew, they have 84, but I'll explain a bit more about how those numbers are deceptive in just a moment. The actual feeling of doing Duolingo is basically translation exercises. In a well-designed course, not all of them are, you will have initial exposure to a new word, then see it in a sentence in context, then later have to put full sentences together based on hearing or reading the new material in the target language, and then eventually you cycle to producing the newly learned material from prompts in your first language. Simple stuff. They theoretically have spaced repetition built in, but they keep sticking with the order of the course and how the SRS works, and that's actually part of why I made the resources I made. Did I mention that I made a PDF resource as an unofficial companion to study with Duolingo? Because I did that. More on that in a minute too. Anyway, a skill, a circly dude is what I call it, will have some number of lessons, and moving up a level, a unit will have a few iterations of a skill, along with a few skills that are just review of previously learned material. Why Duolingo? Now, I don't always or even often recommend Duolingo, at least not as more than a diversion when you have a few quiet minutes and want to pass the time with a dopamine hit from some language study. I'm not using Duolingo for Italian much at all, despite getting pretty hardcore about learning Italian recently. So, why even bother making a resource or a whole ass video about it for Hebrew? Well, Hebrew is not French. And by that I mean there is so much less available for Hebrew learners, and a lot of it is just not the same caliber. There are textbooks, but they assume that you are in a classroom. There are fewer podcasts, fewer books, and they're of a lesser caliber. In fact, one resource that I'm still using is the worst textbook I have ever seen, with editing that has moved beyond the occasional mistake to what I can only characterize as a deliberate prank on the reader. I don't recommend using that textbook without very specific caveats I'll add later in this video, because it would literally be considered immoral in my religious framework. It's lifnei iver. So there's just not a lot of great resources out there. And Duolingo Hebrew is actually, in this tremendously impoverished field of options, one of the least bad. In some ways, it's actually sometimes good. Kind of. So how is Duolingo Hebrew different? Hebrew Duolingo is different from other courses that Duolingo offers in that it has native speaker audio, not a French text-to-speech engine, for instance, and it was organized by real native speakers who include all sorts of great material, cultural allusions, and blazingly fast casual speech, especially the female voice.
מאז שהיא עזבה אותו, הוא בודד.
It's also organized differently. So for French, a typical skill might have 4 lessons and introduce 3 verbs with the same conjugation paradigm in a thematically related situation like shopping or being in a hotel or whatever. So for instance, you'll learn sortir, dormir, and partir, and you'll learn them in the context of staying in a hotel. First lesson will have, say, first and second person singular conjugations. Je sors de l'ascenseur, tu dors dans la chambre d'hôtel, etc. Second might have a third person. The third will have plurals, and the fourth puts it, and the fourth puts, and the fourth puts it all together. Yeah, not in Hebrew. There's one skill that's 11 lessons, not 4 or 5, and it's like all the fall conjugation verbs. Literally, it's 45 verbs. I counted. So already you're getting fewer example sentences and less time on each verb, less analysis, less conjugation, and less familiarity. But you're also getting way more content in 84 units of Hebrew than in 84 units of French. So there's a trade-off. My process. When I first started, I was just passing the time in 2020. I don't know why I had so much free time back then. Maybe somebody can jog my memory. I was not super serious about it and just went with the course. This did not work. More recently, I decided to get serious about it, especially when I became disillusioned with, well, using anything else either. First, I started by writing everything down in notebooks. That helped because I could see all the vocabulary in one place and refer back to it. But it wasn't enough. Next, I started downloading pre-made Anki decks that purported to have all of the course content. First was one with just vocabulary that might have a single conjugation for a verb. This helped. Later, I downloaded a deck that's a bit of overkill, but it had flashcards with multiple choice for verb conjugations. And between poring over verb charts and quizzing myself on the full conjugation paradigms, I feel like I actually started to learn the verbs in a way that I could retain them. I also noticed something that has turned into an academic paper, but that's a different video for a different time after peer review. Then I hit on adding images. Only recently did I start doing my current thing of having images for the concept on one side and images for phonological priming on the other. I have completed Anki decks for all of the vocabulary in Duolingo, and one thing that I noticed almost immediately was that if I got out ahead of Duolingo in my flashcards, I got more out of Duolingo because I wasn't trying to learn to recognize the vocabulary or the grammar concepts. I was already somewhat familiar with them, and I could just use Duolingo as example sentences to really reinforce what I was effectively learning elsewhere first. The course contents are great, the organization not so much. I also joined the very helpful but sometimes linguistically incorrect Duolingo Hebrew Fandom Wiki. I thought it could use some updates, but I liked it so much that I compiled it all into a single document, edited it, wrote clearer explanations around its content, and added a few images for clarification, mostly so I could share with family members. I'm making that available to channel members and patrons, along with a spreadsheet of all the vocabulary from it, and a starter Anki deck with AI-generated audio. I'll also point you all towards the decks I used before. If you're a patron or a channel member, as of this video's release, you have access to version 1, which has all of the explanations and vocabulary. You'll also have access to a spreadsheet with all the vocab from the list. When I'm done with version 2, which has example sentences and sentence fragments or chunks from both Duolingo and other sources like Reverso Context, podcasts, and books, you'll have access to that too. I'm making everything accessible at all tiers. It's kind of pay what you will, but hey, a little bit. So the big question is, does it work? The answer is sort of. If you learn the course contents from Duolingo, you learn a surprising amount. I used italki occasionally for speaking practice, though I prioritized finishing the course first, and I found that, perhaps unsurprisingly, the more I did, the more I knew. About 50 units in, I found I could listen to entire episodes of Zman Ivrit, a great podcast you should support, and I understood everything. So that's pretty great. Conversations were a bit more hit or miss, and I-24 News was beyond my ken. Shortcomings. What were the shortcomings? There were serious shortcomings, however. First of all, the vocabulary was extensive, including things like space probe or economic recommendation, but also Jewish things like golem, or even Israel-specific things like bomb shelter, which I never learned in French Duolingo. But while I'm glad I can talk about space probes, I would prefer if it weren't at the expense of some basics that constitute very obvious oversights, like to laugh or loud. These are like basic first 650 words kind of ideas. Second, there's just not enough audio, even though it is of a higher caliber than other courses. And there's this one weird voice that sounds like he's from Lakewood, New Jersey, on like 3 sentences randomly, and the word shum. It's bizarre. Third, there are unfixed glitches, including an entire lesson where the questions and corresponding answers are scrambled. Absolute nightmare to get through, and a hard quitting point for many people who use, or let's be honest, used the course. More important than all of those, though, is the fact that there's simply not enough repetition to learn everything, especially when it comes to the verbal paradigm. They don't treat verbs the same as in other bigger courses, and if anything, they need more explanation in Hebrew, not less. Lastly, you're learning a new script, new vocabulary, and new grammar simultaneously, all without explicit guidance. When I first started, there was a comment section that was generally helpful, with both a full transliteration of example sentences and discussion of the vocabulary. There was also a lot of weird political discussion, and the Hebrew language signal to messianic end times evangelical Christian prophesying noise ratio was pretty low. Still, I made it work for me, and at the end of the day, I'm glad I used it as a resource. Recommendations and resources. So here's my recommendation. If you're going to try to make Duolingo work, which you may have all different reasons to do, you need to do outside homework. You need your extracurriculars. I use two Anki decks, I'll link in the comments and in a Patreon post. You could make your own using my recommendations around how to add images and other mnemonics, starting from a basic deck I'll make available to my members and patrons. And you absolutely don't have to do this, but I've made a huge document building on the fandom wiki that includes all of the vocabulary and a ton of grammatical explanations that I fleshed out even more fully, including tables, charts, and pictures. If you want to know not just why the formal word for wearing a hat is weird, but also how it relates to the Rambam, the 11th century Moroccan/Spanish rabbi, or how the word for ring is related to Egyptian hieroglyphics, then think about getting this document as an unofficial companion to your study with Duolingo. I'll make it available for members and patrons. It won't replace Duolingo, nor should it, and I encourage you to use Duolingo Plus or Pro or whatever they're calling it. But it can make that a lot easier. And I know it works not just for me, but for others because I've shared it with a select few friends and family already. And if you're going to do it, I want to be clear. You should probably also upgrade your Duolingo to Plus so you don't risk getting locked out if you make some wrong answers. But what are your other realistic options? Well, first, here's what I'm doing. I'm using the Routledge Colloquial Hebrew textbook that I loathe. Now, fair warning, this is the absolute worst, and I don't recommend it for anybody, and I've got a video planned about how awful it is. The first edition is actually okay, which I have on PDF. The second is a train wreck of bad editing and sloppiness that is practically unusable, including off by one errors in the vocabulary lists, so you'll learn all the words wrong. But the course content is good, and I'm using my textbook to Anki deck pipeline that I'll make a video about to extract the content and keep it moving. Leave me a comment if you want a video about that pipeline. I'm doing that mostly to shield my wife from having to ever actually look at one of these hideously formatted, rage-inducingly error-riddled pages. If after all this you still want to buy a copy, you can do so with my Amazon affiliate link below, but don't say I didn't warn you. And again, I'll make my customizable Anki deck available to members and patrons. I'm about 4 chapters in out of 14, but be forewarned, like, seriously, the content is great and you get a lot out of it, but I also can't in good conscience recommend it without all these caveats. So buy it with my link or not, I don't know. If you do buy it and yours is good, let me know because I really want mine to be a terrible pre-production misprint accident and not a real book that they actually sell to people for real money. Another option that I like as a supplement is Zman Ivrit, the podcast. You could absolutely just use the audio, show notes, and audio and add vocabulary to an Anki deck as you listen, sort of like what One Word at a Time recommends, and build up a really solid foundation in Hebrew. But where it really shines is for somebody who is already intermediate, like me, thanks bizarrely to Duolingo. There's also Piece of Hebrew and the Piece of Hebrew Club. That's a paid club, but I really, really like their content and their add-ons, and it's easy to use their add-ons to do the same thing. Dump it all into an Anki deck and memorize, memorize, memorize. I particularly like that they do the classic get ready with me videos and you end up seeing all sorts of vocab you might not see in a textbook. I have learned so much from them. I should probably do a full review. If you want to get started with them, click my link in the description. Recommend against. So given that I've basically said that the Routledge and Duolingo are hashpach chama, if you'll pardon my French, but also that I use them, is there anything that's so bad I wouldn't use? Well, yes. There are other textbooks like the Routledge Not Colloquial. It seems actually fine, but it's predicated on the assumption that you're in a classroom setting. If you have a tutor or a teacher or you're in a class, go for it. For self-study, I would not recommend it. And honestly, based on their ads alone, I recommend against Rosen School.
Want to know 7 reasons why you should learn Hebrew now?
Not only do they have a bad reputation for shady behavior, but they have ads that say completely deranged and factually untrue things about linguistics in general.
Ancient roots. Did you know Hebrew is the first spoken language in the world?
And Hebrew in particular.
With a vocabulary 6 times smaller than English, it's simpler to learn.
Not a good look. Finally, I couldn't really say much about Citizens Cafe, though I have heard a few positive anecdotes from people who are satisfied with them. I had hoped to give them a shot in Tel Aviv this summer, but, well, you know. If you like what I'm doing with the channel, you can support it on YouTube with super thanks or over on Patreon at patreon.com/languagejones. Members and patrons will have access to all my source sheets and companions and Anki decks and products as I build them. This is a new thing for me, so please be patient as I figure it out. I am working on these things, but I do have a toddler. Finally, please leave a comment. They're great for the algorithm, and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, happy learning and behatzlacha.